As a content creator, one of the things that's most difficult is thinking of unique content, bringing different exciting things to the forefront where you would entertain your audience as well as yourself and try to bring different facets of your interest together as one. And that's something that I'm going to bring into this video today. Now, the concept of today's video is bringing in two things that I'm passionate about. One is obviously fragrance, and the next is men's jewelry / watches and accessories. In this particular case, it's watches. Now, in the watch space, it has that snobbery, that mystique, as well as that novelty and that enthusiast quality, just like fragrance. But like fragrance, there are some iconic pieces in the watch world that I figured if I were to pair a watch with a fragrance or a fragrance with a watch, what combinations speak to me and I feel would go together based on either characteristics. So I've compiled a list of 8 watches and 8 fragrances that I've paired together that I feel marry, well, at least in my brain. Let's roll my motherfucking music so I can put you on to 8 historical monumental watches with 8 historical monumental fragrances. We're all alone. In case you cared, out of all your friends, I want to be Cuba. Blessed morning, my beautiful peoples. You know who it is. It's your boy, C to the U to the B to the A. Now, this was an extraordinarily difficult video, and honestly, this is just my perception, right? And I want the audience to be interactive as well, especially if you're into the watch space. There's gonna be a lot of watch experts out there, which I am not, which can add their 10 cents worth, but this is one person's opinion and my thought process between my limited watch knowledge, the selection of watches that I wanted to pick, and the selection of fragrances that I wanted to pick. So there's at least 10 historical watches that I can think of off the head, but it was kind of difficult to pair them all, so I narrowed it down to 8. The first watch that comes to my brain when you talk about notoriety, history, relevancy nowadays is the Rolex Submariner. The Rolex Submariner is one of these watches that's been replicated over and over. It's been paid homage within several different markets, all internationally. But there's one thing specifically that you can't deny, is that Rolex Submariner, no matter what, where, how, the back alleys of Subnunafu in the middle of nowhere, that Rolex Submariner will always be recognized as a Rolex. You know it, it's historical, it's important. So for me, a Rolex Submariner pairs well with Creed Aventus. Whether you like Aventus or not, we can't take away the historical importance, the statement, the sales, the impact that Creed Aventus had in the fragrance space, especially in the niche market. Think about it. From my recollection, the most popular fragrances were in the designer space. The designers ruled everything. Rarely did the niche really take off until the last maybe 15 years or so. So when you think about an iconic fragrance that's replicated consistently, copied by cloners, designer brands, etc., has that same symbolic reference as a Rolex Submariner to me. So I think a Rolex Submariner and Creed Aventus pair nicely together as 2 important historical pieces. Next one. The next fragrance that I selected that I thought was historically important and made a splash in the fragrance world was Acqua di Gio by Giorgio Armani. So when I think of Acqua di Gio, I think of fresh, historically important, groundbreaking, legendary, yet still rides a little bit under the radar, slightly. The name is known by everyone. It made a big splash. It's still very popular, maybe not as popular as some of the other ones, but still holds weight. And for me, a Cartier Santos speaks to me, pairing well with Giorgio Armani's Acqua di Gio. Cartier Santos in the watch space is a well-respected watch. The Cartier brand being, I believe, the first wristwatch that came out dating back to 1915 or 1917 with the Cartier tank. But the Santos is still something that you can put on. It's classy, you dress it up, you dress it down, it's sporty, very respected timepiece, not super expensive, but not cheap by any means, and just speaks of class, still fun, has a retro vibe, has a lively energy about it, and with the different color variations and straps and things that they offer under the Cartier umbrella, I think it pairs very nicely with Acqua di Gio. Next one. Now, another historical fragrance would be Polo by Ralph Lauren. That green bottle with the gold cap, everybody knew it was pure class. You speak of elegance, sophistication, money, success. Ralph Lauren, the name of power, Polo, was blowing up before our very eyes with not only the fragrance, but the merch that came with the fragrance. You don't know anybody that wasn't hyped to get a Polo duffel bag with their purchase from a major department store. Ralph Lauren was taking over the world, but it's a historic piece that isn't worn crazy nowadays, but a lot of the flankers still remain, and that initial Polo green set the ground for the revolution of fragrance, right? And for me, that screams the Patek Philippe Nautilus. Created by the master Gerald Genta dating back to 1976, a classic staple piece that unfortunately nowadays you see bust down with a bunch of diamonds. Nobody cared about a Patek Philippe Nautilus 10 years ago, but nowadays people are starting to realize the sign of success as the Patek Philippe lineup is part of the holy trinity of watches. So in my mind, if you think of the original green Polo, classic, debonair, wealth, success, reaching those higher pinnacles of when that fragrance came out, I have no choice but to think of Patek Philippe Nautilus. Classic, status, wealth, prestige. The Patek Philippe Nautilus, just like that Polo green, not a youthful watch or a youthful fragrance. You have to be a particular person to pull that fragrance off just like that watch. Not gonna be that dude in a decaled Honda Civic that's completely slammed to the floor on airbags wearing a Patek Philippe Nautilus. It just doesn't play hand in hand. So for me, Polo green, the original, pairs beautifully with a Patek Philippe Nautilus. Next one. Now this one was a tough one. A very historical timepiece that is still to this day slept on by a ton of people because all these other watches are taking that notoriety, especially based on the popularity in the hip hop scene or celebrities and things of that nature. But the true watch enthusiasts know that this watch is not only absolutely amazing, aesthetically super handsome, if purchased right, retains good value, historical as I keep saying, and that's none other than the Speedy, the Omega Speedmaster. Debuted in 1948, the Omega Speedmaster, aka the Moon Watch, went to the fucking moon. And although loved by a ton of people, again, has history. It has the sex appeal. It has that swagger, chronograph, different styling, clean bracelet. A lot of people sleep on it. However, if you have a Speedmaster, there is no way anybody who knows anything about watches is gonna downplay or put their nose down at you. So one of the fragrances, and this might be slightly controversial, for me, that paired nicely was Hermès Terre d'Hermès. Now, Terre d'Hermès is not a fragrance that is talked about like that anymore. But if you think about the impact that Terre d'Hermès had when it came out, and it still holds relevancy today, if you were to pull an old bottle of Terre d'Hermès out and spray that fragrance, that signature scent will spark memories throughout. Beautiful, bright, earthy, citrus. A lot of people took inspiration from that scent profile and maybe modernized it or switched it up or made their own that possibly is better than that scent profile, but that scent profile is legendary. Like the Omega Speedy, Terre d'Hermès needs its mantle and needs its position in the fragrance space, whether you want to believe it or not, at least in my opinion. The Speedy is a gorgerific watch. Everybody must have one in their collection if they have any love for watches, or if they can afford it, trouble. And I think for me, Terre d'Hermès and the Omega Speedmaster pair nicely together. Next one. This next one, along with the Rolex Submariner, equally recognizable anywhere in the world. Worn by our leaders. Still a symbol of success, wealth, position, achievement. That's the Rolex Presidential, the Day-Day. The Rolex Day-Day, aka the Presidential, based on the different Jubilee style band that it has, the Presidential band, is a legendary timepiece also mimicked by a ton of people, but hasn't been mimicked successfully based on its day-date function. And for me, a legendary scent profile that still holds weight today, Dior Fahrenheit. Both classical pieces not to be worn by the youth. You've already worn this when you reached a particular status, an age, a level of maturity. these are when these two shine beautifully together. Although Fahrenheit is not commonly worn nowadays as a Rolex Day-Date would be, you can still pull out a Dior Fahrenheit and still pull ass. It's still an amazing scent profile, still completely unique. Although it's released a number of flankers of that scent profile, it is still a classical, groundbreaking scent profile that shook the world when people started to smell that joint. And let's be clear, the Rolex Presidential, aka the Day-Date, when it released in 1965, people were just like, wow. Gorgerific timepiece, completely ahead of its time, and has still classically been left the same. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, there are different tweaks, there's different size variations. Nowadays, there are different dial variants as well as metals of the actual watch, but the whole aesthetic is kind of still the same. It still keeps that essence and aura, and I feel that Dior Fahrenheit still hold that same position. So those two marry perfectly together. Now, I mentioned the Cartier tank before, so I didn't want to leave that off this list, as it's more important slightly than the Cartier Santos, as it was first released in 1917. The Cartier tank for me, Egoiste, that leathery tobacco bomb, classical monster, performance beast, just debonair. It should be an older gentleman, salt and pepper with a tobacco pipe, just living his best life, knowing that I've reached this status, I'm done, pass it on to the next one because I'm living my best life. And nothing is more elegant than a Cartier tank on a leather strap, smaller size, as smaller sizes and wristwatches are making a resurgence. So I feel that the Egoiste and its classic position, groundbreaking scent profile, impact, classic debonair, damn near regalness, Cartier tank and the Egoiste pair beautifully together. Next one. Now, the least expensive watch on this list, which holds a lot of historical significance, is the Casio G-Shock. Still a watch that is worn today. The shit could be run over by 3 tankers and still survive. It holds weight. It is a recognizable timepiece as well, most notably for its digital advances as well as its rugged ability to just withstand anything thrown at it. Nowadays, there's a lot of modification and modernized versions, but it's still under the Casio umbrella, and that G-Shock is a beast. And for me, that screams cool water. Throwback, legendary, sexy, fresh, slightly sporty, isn't worn a ton, but when it's pulled out, it turns heads. It is not dead. It is still around, still surviving, still kicking. It is a legendary piece that shook the world. A scent profile that has been replicated, but still holds weight, still super fun. If you put on a cool water right now, the nostalgia is next level. So trust me, in my opinion, G-Shock and cool water pair beautifully together. Next one. And finally, this fragrance, I don't feel has reached legendary status as of yet, but I think it will. It shook a lot of shit up. It's still a super high selling fragrance nowadays. It has sex appeal and a little bit of lineage, which I will battle, and this one was a hard one to put together, but the reason why I put this watch and this fragrance together is the sportiness, yet sexiness. And that's Chanel Bleu de Chanel and the Rolex Daytona. Now, it's kind of difficult, but when you think of Daytona, at least when I think of Daytona, I think of car races. The classical man in that distressed denim, that leather jacket, the 1960s, that still ruggedly handsome dude, classical movie star at that point, the westerns, the cowboys, the James Deans, the Steve McQueens of the world. When I think of Bleu de Chanel and that DNA, that's what comes to my brain. Able to put off some classical nuances, but still very modern. The Rolex Daytona has gone through a bunch of variants and still continues to be one of the most popular in the Rolex lineup and grail for a lot of people, as it covers 2 portions, class and sport, functionality, ruggedness, success, badass. And I think Bleu de Chanel hits a lot of those marks as well. Not yet to be a classic, as the Daytona is a classic piece. However, I feel that the Bleu de Chanel fragrance will go down in the history books in making a huge impact, hence why it still continues to sell like crazy. There are other flankers that continue to sell like crazy. So for me, these two kind of paired nicely together. And this is my list of what watch would pair with what fragrance, and I hope you guys enjoyed this concept. Please feel free to leave your comment below to pair what particular watches. I know that there's more significant watches, IWC watches, JLC reversos. My favorite, the AP Royal Oak. I understand. There's a ton of other watches, and maybe I'll do a part 2. If you're looking for a part 2, please leave it in the comments below. I love y'all mother suckers from the heart, and I'll see y'all snitches next time. You know who it is? Biggest in the game. Smooches.
What's fresh? Who's best? One of them's gonna pass the test. Cubaknow. For the fly gun holder, money folder, molar roller, start tag when it's time to call back. For the rough, rugged, and raw way, this nigga Jay, it's a game, but he don't play. Hey, for all the chicks that got dead in the penthouse suite on top of my mom's crib. It's nonsense you never get in. It's nonsense that you would think that you would.